wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Whatever you choose for a career path, remember the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose.
Welcome to In Bloom. I am your host, Michaela Richmond, and this is a Pro Humanity podcast.
All right, this one is an absolutely amazing episode. I'm so excited for it and for y'all to hear it. But one thing before we start, this episode does have a couple of audio hiccups. It shouldn't be too noticeable, but just in case you do notice, sorry for that. We are working on fixing that. So thank you so much, and I hope that you enjoy this episode.
Okay, so today I'm sitting with, how do I pronounce your last name again? I want to make sure I get this right.
I don't know, honestly. So I always say Beaudreau. That may or may not be actually how you say it. But yeah, that's what I go with.
Beaudreau.
Yep.
Okay, well today I'm sitting with Matt Beaudreau. Beaudreau. He is the founder of Acton Academy Placer schools. He is the co-founder of the Apogee Strong Mentorship Program, and he's the host of the Essential 11 podcast. His passions are education and freedom, and I am so excited today to talk to him about everything that he's learned, what he believes, and everything that he's doing.
So cool, man. Honored to be here.
Yeah, okay. So I would actually love to start with how you got into this whole space of education and freedom and how you ended up here.
The education piece, I mean, freedom is something that that was something I always inherently just kind of valued and kind of always marched to the beat of my own drum. And I figured that out pretty dang early on. And it's just as I see more and more of it being taken away, I think I've learned to value it for, what it is. But the education thing is a different one because I kind of fell into it. I'd always enjoyed school, but never necessarily thought that that's where I was going to go career wise. And so, coming out of college, I actually turned down the big job offer that I had coming out, which was going to be at the White House, and had said no to that right before graduating. So then I graduated with no job, and I needed to just find something. I needed to find something now, kind of thing. So I ended up at kind of doing some odd jobs for companies that are relatively well known, but nothing spectacular. But what I always had was the ability to enjoy what I was doing and pour myself into it and at least do a good job at what it was. And so that helped me get recruited kind of from company to company, and ultimately landed me at Stanford University. And so being at Stanford and starting to see the game of education from the inside out, I went, okay, well, it's more of a game than people think it is. And I'm interested in kind of sticking around and seeing what I can do to kind of help change the trajectory of this game and see what I can do with that. I didn't know what the hell that meant. But that's kind of where the journey started, was actually at Stanford University a couple of decades ago at this point.
That's incredible. So you mentioned that you turned down the White House job. Why?
So it was a Secret Service job. My senior year of college was when 9/11 happened. And so that was what theoretically at that point gave me some sort of direction to go towards. I was going to just get my degree, and I was working a few jobs to maintain everything, but I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do still, and so that kind of happened, and I went, all right, well, maybe that sounds kind of cool. I'm sort of aggressive. I kind of like, that sounds kind of neat. So I'll apply. And went through the application process and was offered that job at the White House 2 months before graduation. And all I had to do was graduate and then move out to DC. But I connected with a man who was a family friend who was in the White House and was in the Secret Service and was actually getting ready to retire from the Secret Service. He sat me down and just went, "You don't want to do this." And we had about a 3-hour conversation where he just kind of laid out how integrity would be sacrificed daily. And so that's the short form of it. He gave me more, kind of inside details a little bit without, blowing anything, of just how things aren't always what they seem. And politics is a dirty game, and, the lies that sometimes have to be perpetuated by those involved in things. And I just didn't want to be a part of that. Which at that point, again, made me a part of nothing. So I had to figure out a lot of things really quickly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. So So you mentioned the game of education, and I think it's interesting because most of the time you would not consider education to be a game. So why is it a game?
Mhm. Yeah, so the business of it is very much a game. So I differentiate between schooling and real education. I'm all for education. I think people should be educated. I think people,
Mm-hmm.
if you're growing in any area, you are self-educating, and that is from the moment you're born until the moment you die, or until the moment you decide I no longer want to try to collect a new experience or grow in any way. So education is fantastic, but as soon as we put a business around that, the business of it became a control mechanism. Schooling became a way to control a massive amount of people and to condition a massive amount of people to follow certain behavioral patterns. And that's, obviously it becomes more nuanced than that, but that is really the schooling mechanism has been created for that. And my first understanding of that, again, being at Stanford, well, we're taught you grow up, you go to school, you get good grades, you get a good score on, the SATs, you write a good essay, you volunteer a little bit, and that's going to increase your chances. And maybe you're going to get into one of these, quote unquote, elite schools. Well, just at Stanford alone, I find out, okay, if this person has a very mediocre high school transcript, they have a 2.6, they don't do any kind of volunteer work, there's nothing on paper that's special about them. Oh, but their parents are who? Welcome to Stanford University. Your future donors, because you have this much money in the bank, welcome to Stanford University. And that's level one. Like, you are automatically admitted. Like, okay, well, the meritocracy thing kind of just went out the window, right? It was a little bit more of a connection and a financial decision than it was the meritocracy of what this young person has done. And then you start to see all the different levels of that. This person is in and out of jail. Not necessarily a good human, definitely doesn't have the grades, definitely has not had any kind of community service that wasn't judge appointed, but they're a really good point guard. Welcome to Stanford. You start going, okay, there's another level to the game, right? There's the financial side, then there's the fill a need side, then there's okay, we've got 40,000 applicants, but there is this weird thing in US News and World Rankings that if we accept more than 5% of our applicants, well, then we're going to lose our ranking as a quote unquote elite school. So it doesn't matter that we have more people who legitimately should be given an opportunity based on what we say the requirements are. We're not going to accept any more than 5% to, again, perpetuate this myth of being, elite, right? So some people just get ousted because of that. And then you got to take a look at, males, females, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Indian. What do we got? All right, well, this year we're going to we need more Asian males. The next year we need a little bit less Black females. We need to look, and you start playing with those ratios. Well, that's, again, doesn't speak to a meritocracy. It speaks to an appearance. It speaks to an illusion, and it's less than integrous, And so, understanding that early on and knowing, well, okay, well, that's the top of the game, but really the top of the funnel is your kindergarten. That's your top of the funnel, because that's where you start conditioning these people so they go down and want all this. Well, guess what? That entire thing's a game. When you go into conventional school and public school, and the purpose of it, and the governmental influence and the business influence and the politics and the unions, and wait a second, aren't we supposed to be talking about young people? Aren't we supposed to be talking about unlocking the brilliance in each one of them? Aren't we supposed to be talking about inspiring them? Aren't we supposed to be talking about all these things? That is very far down on the list systematically. It's not far down on the list as far as the desires of most teachers. Most of them are phenomenal humans. But you take a really great person and you put them in a box where you go, hey, look, you cannot get out of this box. Doesn't matter how good they are if they're not given the tools to get out of there, and they're put in something that, automatically locks them up. So I got to see all that from the inside, but it started at the university level. And of course, public school teacher, public school administrator, private schools that usually mimic those, and working with districts all over the world, I've gotten to see it inside and out at this point. So I'm very comfortable calling it a game.
Yeah, that makes sense. So okay, so you did Stanford, and then you went to public school, and then you went to private school, correct?
Correct. Yep. Public school as a teacher, then public school as an administrator, and then private schools to see if, well, okay, you're not taking government money, so isn't it different? The problem is it's almost never different, because again, people who are running them, well, they grew up in that same system. So you're trained culturally to believe, well, that's what school looks like. So of course we're going to recreate this. Maybe we'll just throw a deity in there on top of it and say that we're different that way. But it's going to be the same modus operandi, so that you get the same result, really, and you just have a little bit of a different, instead of politics from the government side, maybe you got politics of a church side, or politics of the community that it's paying for this, or you get the same. It's the same pig, different lipstick. I mean, it ends up being the same kind of deal.
So what was that journey like for you? You know, you went from each one to each one, probably hoping to find something different.
Mm-hmm.
How was that?
It was all internal. The entire journey was internal, right? Because as I'm going through and looking at this, same reason I turned down the White House job. Integrity to me is a big deal, and I cannot live in a hypocritical fashion, right? And I think that's the ultimate expression of freedom, is that you are free to say what you believe, which is huge, but you're free to act out those beliefs as well. Right. And I think a lot of people will say one thing and act in another way. To me, that's hypocrisy. I mean, that's the definition of hypocrisy. And that's not anything I have any interest in. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Right. So all of this was a journey in figuring out, well, then what do I want to do? Right. Because there's a game being played at the university level. Well, maybe I'll go try to change it. And that's my naivete. Maybe I'll go try to change it in the public arena. Wait a second, this isn't about kids. I'm helping this kid, but I'm being told to do something else. That's not right either. You know what? I'm going to change it from an administrative standpoint and get my credential in admin. And I go, wait a second, okay, we're talking about government funding, politics. We're not, again, still not talking about kids. Okay, cool. Now that I've got that knowledge, again, the internal battle is, do I do that when I think fundamentally what I'm perpetuating, if I stay here, is not something that's ultimately beneficial? Gosh, I guess I got to go over here. And then there's a drastic pay cut that comes with that. And I got to go through that whole thing. So it's all of that whole thing was internal, continuously going, all right, well, then what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And where the rubber really hit the road was when my oldest daughter got to the point where she was going to be school age, because I'm going, at this point, I either need to figure out a way we're going to homeschool, or we need to create the thing that I think young people need, and she's going to get to be a part of that. And so that was really where it was like, all right, time to get at it.
How do schools work? Like you said that public schools and private schools are similar enough. How do schools work?
They don't. That's the thing. Or they do. Actually, it's probably quite the opposite. It's actually, they work really, really well, right? From a systematic standpoint. And again, like, there's the nuances of where does the money come from and who's really driving the ship, and who's really, you got the government that is really pulling the strings to create a basically an obedient populace. You got private schools who want to just make their stakeholders, the parents and whoever's paying tuition, happy, so they don't want to look too different from public. So even though they don't necessarily they aren't controlled governmentally through funds, they're still controlled by proxy governmentally, because they're wanting to copy this. So they're not seen as different or quote unquote alternative, which again, culturally, you're raised to believe that's a bad thing, by the way, perpetuated by the unions who actually control everything. So the whole idea is that you have a very narrowly defined focus, which essentially creates a population that is intelligent enough to be able to follow directions and to do so well, but not quite aware enough to understand that their mind has been enchained and they should look for something different. So it's a slow encasement of your mind, so that you have a populace that goes, okay, well, now I'm not necessarily capable of critical thought. I'm not going to question the narrative. I'm going to look to whoever claims authority and does so the loudest. I know that there is, an opposite to me, and they're going to be my enemy. I'm going to question some things that have always been universal truths that then break down the moral fabric of society. So it's all of these things, and people go, okay, well, that's crazy. That's this and that. And again, I know good teachers too. The system is designed to where they don't have, over time, they've got less and less and less influence over the young people they have, because the system is so ever encroaching and encompassing. And this has been put together as a long tail game. This is a Prussian model of schooling that is put together not to shift a population over the course of a year, but to shift it over the course of 50, 60, 70 years, to slowly infiltrate. Because what you and I both know, historically speaking, is that's the way real control works. You slowly pull back on a freedom or on whatever. You slowly pick at the fabric of something over a long period of time, and it's less noticeable. Like, it's just a slow thing. And all of a sudden you look 50 years down the road and you're like, wait a second, this used to be so much more robust. And now it's a completely different animal because you've done it over time. And at that point, a lot of times it's too late. So that's what school is.
It's a comprehensive analysis. So you said that this is a Prussian model. When did it begin in the United States? I mean, I know that it was an industrial kind of a thing, but
Yeah.
when did the conception that school had to be this way change?
Yeah, it became compulsory. I mean, the first example of compulsory ed, I think, was in like 1650 or something like that. But I think it was in Europe. It came over and was adopted first in Massachusetts. I want to say like 1812-ish, but it was adopted. Is probably the wrong word for it, because it was met with a lot of public contention, and I'm talking contention like people showing up with guns, going, "The hell you are taking my children." But it still ended up passing in Massachusetts first, I want to say around 1812, and it became commonplace around the US somewhere in the mid 1800s, 1850-ish. And even then, there was the compulsory nature to it, but you were at the front end of this slow burn. So at that front end, you can't make it look super adversarial. So you still give intellectual freedom to your teachers. You still give a wide berth for them to do a number of things. And then slowly over time, that intellectual freedom dissipates. You start to sprinkle in an actual agenda that needs to be. It's no longer an unlocking of a mind. It is an entrapment of a mind to put very, very narrow, specific things into. And so, that's been over the course of now, 170 years, right? And so people talk about alternative ed. People go, oh, okay, well, this is alternative. You open alternative education schools. No, the 170-year experiment of conventional government schools, that's alternative, because for all of the ages prior to, the way we learned was just by doing. You grew up doing. You grew up taking on responsibility. You learned you were interested in reading something, you got into it. You just learned by doing. That's what we do now. But because we're 170 years into this experiment, what we're doing, which is the natural thing, is now called alternative, right? Where anything homeopathic, naturally occurring, is alternative medicine, because we've industrialized and systematized medicine as well. And so there's a parallel there. Anything outside of that is alternative. We're like, no, that's actually the way it's always been.
Interesting. Okay, so in one of your last podcast appearances, you were explaining how you as a teacher were trying to help a student and the system wasn't allowing you to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that happened a number of times. So that was not uncommon. I think what you're referring to was talking about being in public school. The first schools that I worked in when I came out of Stanford were some rougher schools in California, kind of a gang infested environment, and a lot of gang activity. And so I had elementary school students and middle school students who were already becoming heavily involved in the gang activity, and a lot of them were going home to parents who were still in gangs. And so I think I was referring to a young man in particular that was being told when he got home, it was like, get out on the porch and start slinging, and make sure you're only wearing this color, and it was all that kind of stuff, and so he was somebody that I could see. So like he's just this brilliant young man and so much potential, and legitimately just had this really good heart. You could almost see this internal battle of like, well, I don't have a choice of doing this. Like, this is what I have to do. but I definitely don't want to, and I don't think this is right. And so became a long, a few years of mentorship, where I was really trying to pour into this young man and give him options and opportunities and things to work on and things to move towards. But what I was being told was, hey, you got to hold him to a higher standard on algebra, and like you got to make sure he's hitting this certain quote unquote grade level performance, because that's what's going to allow him to get out. I'm like, that he goes, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and goes home and tells his parents that, and so now they're not going to have him go sit on the porch anymore because he said that. That's horseshit. Like he's there's other things he needs right now. And so that was again part of the game, right? Funding meant he needed to do well in algebra. Our scores, quote unquote scores, means he needs to do well in algebra so we could show we're a good school. And that's another thing that kills me, is that whole good school concept. Well, we're in part of the country or part of the state with the best schools, that means you're in a good socioeconomic area. That's what it means. The schools are the schools are the schools are the schools. I've been in the ganglands, I've been in Disneyland, and the schools are not different. The quality of teachers, it does not drastically change that much. What changes is the socioeconomic status and the opportunities that these young people have, and whatever emphasis is coming on, how well you have to do at school. You might have a school with a rich area where kids do really, really well at school, and all that means is they do well at school. It doesn't mean they're happy, healthy, you know, it doesn't mean that there's not drug issues there. The drug issues I saw at ganglands were more mundane. It was weed. And you go over to some of these other schools and they got some really high end stuff that ends up being, just as much of a perpetuating a long tail drug issue in some of your richest areas. So, it's all again, it's an illusion, but it's an illusion that so many people have bought into that it's become culture, that it's become the religion of school in our country.
What do you think that speaks to in terms of what we value?
I don't think it speaks to our values. I think it speaks to our fear.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the human nature of being fearful and wanting a tribe badly and being willing to sacrifice our individuality to make sure we're a part of that tribe, and the emotional attachment that we have to that. And I think it's more of that. I really believe that if we could help continue to raise up the individuals and create character driven, personally responsible individuals, then what we'd see as a collective would be something that we can't even imagine. But we don't value that as a society. We say we do, but then we take on all these things that fly counterintuitively to that. So we adopted these systems of like, okay, cool, this is what everybody should do at this time, and that's how things are going to be okay. And it's our fear that drives us to believe that and hold on to that, even when you get intellectually walked through the fact that that's wrong. It's just like and again, I'm not knocking religion. What I'm saying is it's as hard to break free from as it is for people to break free from a religion. And I've had that experience over and over and over. And they're like, yes, 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 yes. Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm like, okay, cool. And they're like, but I just can't let go. I can't let go of traditional school. I just can't. Like, I have to, like, it has to hit that metric is more important to me. And I don't even know why. And I know it's wrong, but emotionally, I can't step away from it. That is fear in the worst form possible.
So what do you say, like, how do you help people to get out of that? Like step through that slowly?
What I have come to believe now, I tend to be hesitant in saying what I know, or I would say what I have the best evidence for at this point. Again, I'm always glad to change my mind if better evidence is presented in an area, but what I have come to really believe now is that you can't get somebody out of it. You can only give them the option of getting out of it. You can, it's very much like the whole Morpheus, in the Matrix kind of deal, right? You can only open the door, you can offer them the truth, but at the end of the day, they've got to step through the door, and you can't force them. You can try to force them. You can force them, but it's always a short term. Like you can force somebody, you can drag somebody, you can push somebody. You can beat them over the head with logic and they'll go, oh, okay, cool. But if they didn't make the decision to let go of the fear to step into the reality, then they're just going to go right back. So I no longer am in the business of convincing anybody. I just say what it is that I've seen and what evidence I believe is there, and invite people to come along, and they either do or they don't.
Was that kind of hard for you to accept though?
Hell yeah.
Like,
Of course it was. For sure. For sure. Like um that's something that you got to figure, like you got to have experience and train yourself to get out of, because especially when you feel like it's something that's so important, um you just want everybody to understand it, you want everybody to experience it, you want everybody to find the peace that comes along with that, you want that for everybody. So it's hard. There's a transition period where it's really, really hard to get over that. Very much so.
so what did you do?
Just kept I mean, it was really just, it was, again, goes back to the internal work. You eventually just have to let go. You got to let go of the need to, it comes from a need, or a desire to help other humans. And that's where it is. What I had to come to terms with is that I cannot help somebody who will not help his or herself. You just can't. Um, I will always offer, but I can't get emotionally wrapped up in whether or not they take that offer. Because I also have seen that sometimes they won't take the offer, but they will 3, 4, 10 years down the road. And that's great. And that's awesome. And it can celebrate it then. So I never look at it as, a net negative. I always stay optimistic with it. And I think ultimately what I need to do is not look at it as a failure myself, right? Like I couldn't get them to see it. So then something, God, I missed the boat somewhere. And, you can beat yourself up all day with that kind of stuff too. So I had to eventually get to the point where I let that go too.
I really admire the fact that you see these problems, and I mean, first you went through all of the traditional routes, but then eventually you realized that the best way to fix everything is just to start your own thing. And like, that's amazing. So how was that experience?
Hard as hell, super hard. But it is the best way to change something, is just to create, the alternative. We got rules in our house, and one of those, rule number 6, I think, is no complaining, fixed it. Right. So if I'm not willing to come forward with a solution on something, then I need to be quiet. And so this was something I couldn't be quiet about. So again, to not go back to the hypocrisy, I needed to provide an answer. I needed to provide an alternative. I needed to provide something that wasn't misaligned with what I believed and who I was and what I was saying I believed. Right. So I needed to create that. It became my responsibility at that point to do that, knowing that is the only thing that gets you through the hardship, right? Because it is a responsibility, because it is hard. Creating anything is harder than being told what to create, right? It's a vastly different thing, and it's something that is a longer game than most people want to play. Metaphorically speaking, I think fitness and health is one thing that gets people to understand it, right? Like it's not really actually a secret how to get in really good shape. Like it's not really a secret. It's you eat well and you exercise. People know that. So why do we have so many people who are so severely out of shape? If everybody knows that, well, it's the fact that you actually have to do it, and you have to do it for a long time. You have to do it every single day for a long period of time. Not meaning like not many hours that day. I'm just saying a long period of time in terms of like, you got to do it today, and then you got to do it tomorrow, and you got to do it the next day, and you got to do it every day for the week, and you got to do it for the month, and you got to do it for the year, and you got to do it for the next year. And that's where people mess up. Building a business is very much like that, especially as you're building something that is so antithetical to the cultural fears that have been perpetuated. But that's the hardest part. But again, like anything else, if you put in that work, or just like being fit, you put in that work for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, well, 15 years down the road, it's easier to maintain that, because you've got such a solid foundation. Building an alternative like this is the same thing. So it's getting to the point where it's not easy, but it is easier to maintain and easier to grow at this point.
That makes sense. Why was Acton your
you're like, yes,
the
this is it.
choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good question. It was a professor who had alerted me to Acton Academy, and said, I think you'd be interested in this. And to be fair, she'd alerted me to a few other, again, quote unquote, alternative systems of education, but Acton being one of those. And when I went to go visit and sat in, I visited all these various systems, and all of them included freedom for young people, which I admire, and Sudbury and Agile Learning Centers and all of these, freedom loving systems, and I appreciated that in all of them. But what I saw at Acton was a correlating responsibility, right? I saw freedom at your Sudbury schools, but what I saw was kids who quite literally, or some of them decided they were going to play video games all day every day. Quite literally, some of them were deciding like, it should be okay to have trash all over. I mean, one of them was in a house and there was a kitchen, and the kid was taking out a box of cereal and just pouring it all over the floor and playing with it and then just leaving it there. And I just didn't see that translating into any modicum of success. I think that there is a standard that you should meet as far as a human being. Not that I'm saying I have the answers to what that standard is, but I think pursuing things and having a purpose and treating other people well and moving towards a goal, I think those things are necessary for humans to grow and to ultimately feel happy, right? Not you don't chase happiness, you chase a goal, you chase a purpose. And I think humans get happiness from that. And I didn't see that being perpetuated there. So it was when I was at Acton, I saw a correlating responsibility. I saw young people who were operating, their studio space like more like a company, and the adult wasn't having to do it. The young heroes were, and they had a contract of like character where they said, look, this is who we are, and this is how we're going to be, and we're going to hold each other to that, and we're going to raise the bar. And you look at any elite unit, the Navy SEALs being one that I refer to quite often. They're an elite unit because they have this really high standard, and they each individually have to meet it, and then they have to hold each other accountable to stay there. And that was part of what makes them elite. It's this elite performance, but an elite level of trust that goes with that. And I think for our young people, I saw them operating in that way, and you could just also see the peace of mind that comes with that. And I just went, man, this is I don't know that there's any panacea. I don't know that there's any perfect way. I don't believe there is. And I'm not saying Acton is the right place for everybody. It's definitely not the right place for everybody. I think it's for anybody, but it's not going to be the right place for everybody. And those are different things. And so it was those couple hours that I spent there where I went, yeah, man, this is what I want for my, first and foremost, selfishly, this is what I want for my kids. And then I'll invite any other kids that want to come, right? And any other families that want to be a part of this. But it's, again, there's a parenting aspect that comes into it. There's how we deal with culture in our household that comes into it. But acting for my kids as their foundation has been one of the most beneficial things I've done. And I don't know anybody, truthfully, that has met my kids that would not say, man, those are some very happy, healthy, purpose-driven, motivated, at peace, just fun-loving, good humans to be around. Not even just, oh, those are cool kids. Those are just really cool humans. And I don't know of anybody that wouldn't say that. And I credit a lot of that to what we do here, and I can say that about so many of the young heroes here.
I love Acton's well, first, okay, can you give like a 30-second summary of what Acton is?
Yeah. So we say school because that's what people understand. But K through 12, it's really a workplace for kids. It focuses on Socratic methods. We don't, no direct lectures, no answering questions. We focus on Socratic conversations so kids learn how to think, not what to think. We focus on goal-driven and purpose-driven individual responsibilities in academics. So they learn to set their own academic goals, and they're responsible for maintaining those goals. We focus on real-world work in a collaborative fashion. So they have big, high stakes and things they have to collaborate around, and they learn to create more than they consume. And then they take on real world experiences and responsibilities, jobs on campus, jobs off campus. All of that is a part of it. There are so many systems that are involved in that include, maintaining a solid character and how to have good conversations and helping each other and leading, one another. That it's impossible to break that down into 30 seconds because it's so foreign to most people. But in a nutshell, that's kind of the high level focus for us, are all those things.
There are a lot of thoughts that children are not adults and that they should not be treated like adults. And I know that Acton is on the other side of that. They're like
Yep, very
children.
much so.
Yeah, and so like why or what is y'all's belief rooted in? And why do you think that's the case?
I mean, there's probably, we're in this age of everybody's like, show me the studies, right? Um, Sometimes, I mean, I literally have somebody who can come on this and look at me right now and be like, show me the studies that you're wearing a white t-shirt. And sometimes I'm just like, hey, dude, open your eyes. It's right here in front of you. I'm wearing a white t-shirt, right? Sometimes you don't need the study. Sometimes, anecdotes or just seeing something over and freaking over again, you go, okay, cool. Clearly there is something to this, right? And so I'm sure there is some sort of research that I could try to find and dig up and cite. But at this point, it's there's also just a steady dose of, man, I have seen it forever now. you know, I know 12-year-old adults and I know 40-year-old kids, right? And my work with Fortune 500 companies, the reason I get brought in is because of the way generations don't usually see eye to eye, and I help bridge that generational gap uh, at an organizational level. But what we're seeing is, as schooling, as I said, this kind of this long tail game, right? It gets more and more narrow. You got all the cultural influences. You got parental changes in terms of behaviors by parents, and more fear from the parents. And all this, what it's done is it's created entitled young people. If I say, hey, what? Give me a word to describe the millennials, and most people don't even know what millennials are. They just say it's a young person and they suck. Like, that's it. We actually take a look and go, okay, well, I got white hair in my beard. I actually fall in the millennial category based on behaviors. We're looking at patterns of behavior, right? So we say millennials might have been born in some cases as early as like 1977, all the way up to like 1995. And you ask the millennial generation, at what age do you become an adult and completely self-sufficient, meaning you don't live at home, you pay your own bills, and you got to have a job. Those three things. At what age should that happen? The number one answer in our generation, 83 million of us, by the way, in this country, the number one answer is 30. 30. Well, what's interesting is the word teenager didn't even exist until like early 1940s. That wasn't even a concept. You were 13. Congratulations. You're basically an adult. You might be getting married soon. You might be having kids soon, leading grown men into war, being surveyors, living. Tell me that our DNA has changed over these 80 years? No, of course not. Our perspective has changed. Our expectations of young people have changed. That's all that's changed. We've dumbed down what we said. And again, that's not accidental. If you start telling the population that they're not able to do certain things, they start to believe it. They start to hold on to that. Oh, I guess I'm not old enough for it, or I'm not capable for it of it, or my brain isn't developed enough to take on this responsibility, or I've got to wait till I'm a grown up too, right? And so we strip them of the pursuit of happiness. That was part of the foundational, documentation for this country, is that we have the right to pursue happiness. Well, like I already mentioned, I don't think you pursue happiness in and of itself. You pursue purpose, and taking on adult responsibilities is part of that purposeful drive. You see it in young kids. They want to take on responsibility, and they're like, how can I help? Mommy, can I help cook? Can I help put away? Can I do this? Can I do that? Like, they crave it. And then we're like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And then we're going to send you to school that's going to tell you to be a kid forever. And we're going to just, and eventually you just train them to believe that they don't have that ability anymore. And it's to everybody's detriment.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So I had this interesting shift where I grew up from probably um, young to about 12, and I was very into the rules. And then my parents started to, they like just changed their whole structure of parenting. And then all of a sudden it was very, okay, now I'm going to treat you like an actual person and not like a child, and you're going to have responsibility, and you're going to be able to think, and I'm going to talk to you and share things with you. And if you ask questions, I'm not going to dismiss you or anything. And the amount of growth that happened in that period was just like unfathomable almost.
Sure.
And so that's why for me, the idea of Acton, even first treating children like they are adults and showing them that they have choice. Like, I think that that's one of the biggest things is whenever people don't understand how much choice that they have growing up and
Yeah.
becoming adults, it stymies them so much.
Totally does. Yeah, I mean, that's so. Imagine if you start that, having those adult level conversations. Imagine if you have that, and I'm not saying you have adult level conversations around every single thing with a 5-year-old. They can't possibly comprehend all of that, but you still talk to them like an adult. If they ask a question, you still answer it to the best of your ability in an adult fashion. You still can do, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. And they'll only want to go, they'll give you the cues on how far they want to go. But if you always do that and you first start again with choices, but you give them good choices to start, it's just good choices at the beginning. And then you open up those choices more and more and more. And eventually they'll get to the point where choices will be presented to them and they've just got a history of understanding what good choices look like, right? I'm not saying there's infinite sovereignty of a 5-year-old. It's quite the contrary. But you talk to them as if that was there. You take their very narrow viewpoint and you go, boom, here are the choices you're going to make. And then you slowly allow that to open as they continue to grow. Yeah, by the time they're 12, they're quite literally capable of most everything, if you allow that to be the case. And unfortunately, we've made it to where the majority of our society at 30 is quite literally not capable of so many things, including managing their own, emotions and the amount of, mental health issues. I don't believe it's something we're getting better at recognizing. No, it's something we're perpetuating and pushing for. That's a different thing.
It's also interesting to me because this concept of choices, it melds very perfectly with the idea of virtue and the idea of character and the idea of the hero's journey, because those only exist whenever you make choices toward them.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you got to make bad choices. You're gonna mess some things up. You got to fail. But again, fail early, fail often, fail forward. And that's the beauty of what we do here at Acton too, is they just get exposed to more opportunities to fail. Right? They're gonna
I like that.
Yeah, you're gonna collaborate around something, and then you're gonna have to create it, and then you're gonna have a bunch of parents and people in the community come in and check it out, and then you're gonna do something. So we had a talent show, and we had a young man who decided he wanted to try out to be the MC for the talent show, but he was the only one that tried out. So by default, he became the MC. He went out and he tried to make it a comedy session. Well, he's not a stand-up comic, and the things were falling flat on his face, and he didn't prepare in terms of the names or what people were doing. He didn't want to embarrass himself by writing something down and going off a script. He wanted to, but in that he got himself flustered, there was a noticeable bombing on stage for this 12-year-old young man. Awesome. Like, why should we not let that happen right now? We didn't want to, we could do like what schools do and do the illusion of, a winter program where it's really just a bunch of adults forcing kids to do something that looks kind of cute. And then the parents can take pictures and go, yay, that's great. Look what my kid did. No, look what your kid was told to do. Look what they were all told to do. And it gave you this illusion of some sort of structure and the illusion of some sort of cool, fun thing. The kids didn't learn anything other than I just need to be quiet and obey authorities. And then everybody else gives me a cookie for being a good little boy and girl. This young man learned, crap, I need to prepare. Crap, if I go out and try to do this and wing this, like, that's embarrassing and it's nerve-wracking. I need to step up my game. He actually learned something, right? And that's the opportunity. And he learned it at 12 versus learning it when he was 30 and had a wife and kids, and it meant he lost his job, and now they don't know how they're going to put food on the table, and it stresses out the marriage, and it, you know, perpetuates down that when the stakes are a whole lot higher. Why would you not
Mm-hmm.
want them to learn those things at 12 and come back stronger? We had a 17-year-old here get fired from his first job. I was like, great, come back, talk about that. Where did you mess? I mean, he's in tears, but I'm like, come back, talk about it with everybody, talk about it with the rest of the high schoolers, share with them. That's freaking fantastic. That's a great opportunity, because now you will never do what you did again. You get a chance to share with everybody and accelerate their, like, that's real learning.
I agree. I agree. It's interesting because like we in society, we don't like the concept of failure. That we don't like failing. We don't like feeling embarrassed or
Yep.
shameful.
Mm-hmm.
And then the problem that I've found for myself is that whenever I don't like failure, I will set myself on a narrow track where somebody
Yeah.
promises me success,
Yeah.
and that's it. And
Yeah.
then whenever that track doesn't work, then
Yep.
because you're so used to a certain track,
Yep.
you don't see all of the options around you.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what's more often is we get promised the opportunity of success too. And we hear that as, oh, well, you're gonna just do that for me. And then when you just have an opportunity but don't take the steps forward, then you blame whoever promised. You blame the school, or you blame the job, or you blame the person, or you blame the whatever, versus blaming yourself for not taking advantage of the opportunity. Again, it's a vicious cycle. So then we create a society of complainers and a society of victims. And then culture says, oh man, yeah, you're right, you are a victim because you were promised this success and you didn't get there. And so here you go. And the only way to start that and get people really on board with that is, well, they've got to start that super early in school. You've got to learn very early on that failure is not okay, because at this point in your life, at 4 or 5, you've actually been told that it is okay. You actually, as you were learning to walk, you started going, and you failed. You fell down. You fell down, right? And everybody around you went, yay, and they praised your failure. So you went, oh, cool, okay, I'm gonna get back up, and I'm gonna grab the couch, and I'm gonna go a little longer, and then I'm falling down, and everybody went, yay, and they praised your failure. And so you got back up and do it. Now all of a sudden you get to school and you mess up, and everybody's like, what are you doing? And you're like, what? And they're like, you messed this up. Here's where you go. Don't talk. Don't stay in line. Do this. Don't do that. Make sure you get your good grades. If you fail, we're going to have a conference. We're going to have, and you're like, holy okay, cool, man. It whips you all around. And you're like, okay, I guess failure is something to be massively avoided. And then you're only, 12 years away from being set out into the world, a completely conditioned human. It's just looking for somebody else to tell you the shortcut to success, rather than looking at the patterns of success and taking ownership for yourself. That's school.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting also because whenever you were explaining the idea of the baby who's, getting praised for this little step and then he falls, it's not even the idea of praising failure, it's the idea of reframing failure to see it as progress.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's all perspective.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so I I would love to hear your take on the future of education.
Um, so the future of education and schooling, government schools will never go away.
Why?
Too much money, too much politics, too much agenda, too much to benefit from a population that just looks to the government for all the answers. Right? If the government sells you creates the sickness and sells you the pill, they get to gain double time, right? So there's no way that goes away. And there's, again, people who have grown up believing that is what education looks like, is going to school and doing this narrow definition of what school looks like. So we've got the population already met. I don't remember who said it. Somebody said something to the effect of it would only take a single generation of us mandating that you send your babies to school before the population truly believed the baby never would learn to walk unless they went to school. And I think that's very, very true. It would only take a generation of it. We're like, look, that babies, this is how they learn to walk, is they've got to go to school. Otherwise they won't learn to walk. We would, in one generation, disregard all of the historical information that showed otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we've already done it now. We've already disregarded all of history to show how people actually learn, and said, no, school as it is what we need. So there's no way that the government, who depends upon a docile, obedient population, is going to let that go. So that's going to continue. But what is happening is there is a divergence taking place, and unfortunately, there's going to be populations that get the ramification of this more so than others. But there's going to be this divergence because you do have schools like ours, because you do have people who are homeschooling, because you do have this other population over here that is creating the new. And what's going to happen is it's just going to create a division that's further and further away. And I'm pessimistic and optimistic about that at the same time. I don't like that there is this split, culturally speaking, economically speaking. I don't like that this is going to be perpetuated, but I also am going to be optimistic on the fact that, well, we're going to be over here. My kids are going to be over here. They're going to have the freedom to create because we're going to make sure that that is the case. And again, we're just, as more and more that divide takes place, we're going to be screaming over here, come over here, come over here. But we can't force it. So I think you're going to continue to see homeschool populations rise. I think you're going to, until that becomes something that the government wants to make illegal, which I fully believe they will get to. I just don't know how fast. And you're going to have people who get back to self-educating and real education. And so, yeah, I think it's just going to create that division, but government schools aren't going anywhere.
That's interesting. And the idea of division is interesting because you can already see it.
Sure.
I was thinking about this today, actually. I was thinking about the idea of creativity and like how certain things, you look at them and they're just lifeless, like they're just blank. And then you look at other things that humans create and it's full of life. And so I was trying to like come up with a thought as to why that is. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think you look at go to a school, man, and look at your 5-year-olds, and go look at a classroom of 5, even at a conventional school. You go look at that classroom of 5-year-olds that are new to that whole experience, and look at their faces. And you can argue that that's immaturity, or that that's part of just being a kid, or you can realize that at that point, their creativity is just inherent. It's just a DNA thing. It's just part of who they are, and it is just bursting out of them. I've seen enough to know that that can be nurtured and continue on. But what you'll see in a conventional school is you go look at the dichotomy of those guys, and you go to the 13-year-olds, and it's just right. The face is different, and yeah, there's there's the hormones of this and that, and yeah, sure, I guess, but also we have sucked the creativity right out of them. We have said, look, your creativity has very little value here for the most part. What you're going to value is your obedience. We're going to value. So you see that trained out of our population pretty dang early. And it's the outliers that tend to either hold on to it or find it again later. It should be the rule, not the exception.
Yeah, fully agree. Did you always believe this about creativity, or did you have to refine that?
I had to just see it. Yeah, I don't think I necessarily had a thought around it. I think it was one of those things that I didn't necessarily think about. And it was a concept that I really didn't give too much thought to. But over time, it's something that I just kind of noticed and became aware of, versus even actively starting like, where's my thoughts on creativity? I think it was just more that was sort of shaped throughout my experiences.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of having a population that is full of creatives. Like most creatives that I know are very just dynamic. Like they have layers. They're very into cool things and ideas, and it's a good time.
Yeah. Well, then unfortunately they're outliers, right? Like that should be just humanity in general.
Why do you think that we
That's
got to a
DNA.
point, but why do you think that we got to a point where human things were no longer like human things?
Because other humans wanted to control most humans. That's really what it boils down to, is people want to control, and you can't control creative, self-reliant, person responsible, articulate, confident, self-mastered, disciplined humans. You can't control a collection of true individuals. They won't allow it. They won't allow it. So you need to create an alternative. You need to create the obedient, the opposite of the individual. That's what you need to create. And so that's what everything is geared towards systemically, is geared towards that. Again, I'm not knocking, I'm not knocking anybody's spiritual beliefs, and I very much believe in a higher being. But the religions, the systems of religions, use fear to get a population under control and get everybody in line, and then you can always go back to that towing the party line to get somebody to come back into your subservience, right? Medicine has become that same thing. School has become that same thing. Big systems are perpetuated by everybody helping to perpetuate the system. And so, from a cultural standpoint, you've got to be able to create that continuously obedient population. Get rid of the creative.
Yeah, I'm curious, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but what do you believe about God? Like, what do you believe about religion? What do you believe about God? How has that changed?
That's a good question, because I can say, look, I very much believe God is there. I very much believe He has given us insight as to who He is, but I also very much don't believe you're going to find Him in a church, because the church is a system around controlling people versus figuring out who God is. I think a good doctor makes it so that you understand your health enough to never need the doctor, right? So I think a good quote unquote religious leader would make it so that you understand how to create a relationship with God without needing his or her assistance or, donating specifically to it. So I think God's been very open about, look, here's who I am and here's the evidence for it. And a relationship with you would be cool, but I'm also not going to force it. And I don't believe he, pays attention to everybody, loves everybody, is omnipresent. I don't think that that's the case. I think he's actually said otherwise. And I think that's come through, my experimentation. When I say experimentation, I mean trying to dive into the majority of religious beliefs, ultimately landing on the one that, again, best evidence kind of seemed like it made the most sense, and then continuing to go from there. And so I ended up landing in some of a Christian, somewhat of a Christian sort of background, but then started translating to like older manuscripts and working with people who translated older manuscripts, coming from the oldest manuscripts that we have and kind of the Hebrew, kind of background of it, and going Dead Sea Scrolls and kind of taking a look at all of that. And I think that gives you the most clear picture. And I think there's enough evidence in there to show that, again, unless I ever see better evidence, to me, I don't see anything that's better evidence than that. I think, people have a somewhat of an idea of who it is. But I think it's more, their position is more informed by what the pastor says, and what the tradition and the culture says than what God himself says.
Interesting.
It's not the popular. Yeah. It's not the
No,
popular.
but it's interesting because I've actually been hearing this a lot recently. And I don't know if it's just the circles that I've been, starting to go into and talk to people into, but I've been hearing this a lot recently, and I think it's partially because the more that you question one system, the more that you question others, and the more that you recognize how a system can be corrupted, the more you just see it everywhere. So you're not alone.
Yeah, no, and it's, and I know other people that are, in that same boat. And I always believe, questions are infinitely better than answers. And the truth, I do believe in absolute truths in a lot of things. And I don't think an absolute truth ever minds being questioned. Like, why would it? Again, I don't mind if somebody questions me wearing a white t-shirt right now. I don't care. Question it all you want. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm freaking wearing a white t-shirt right now. Like, so that's fine, question it all you want. And I don't think any truth minds being questioned. And I think that's what we're supposed to do. It's the only way you actually get to what the truth is. That's the only way, is to continuously question all of it. And it doesn't mean being paranoid. It just mean, it doesn't mean being paranoid. Like that's a different thing. You just continuously question what it is that you believe, meaning what is the evidence around it? Do I see better evidence? If I don't see better evidence, cool. I'm not changing my perspective. If I see better evidence, cool. I'll change my perspective, because that's part of being self-confident enough and intelligent enough to know that it's okay to change your mind on something. That's actually called growth. It's fine to do that. And the likelihood of you not, if you haven't changed your mind over the course of a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in some area, then you're probably being intentional about living the same life over and over and over again every year, which I don't think is a life. I think that's an existence, and I don't have any desire.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I believe one of the founding fathers, I think it's Ben Franklin, I think, said something along those same lines. Was just like, if you're the same person as you were last year, you're doing something wrong.
hmm I think that's very much true. I think that's very much true. It doesn't mean you have to have profound changes every year, at all. That's not. It doesn't have to be something profound, and it almost never is. It's just a slight. Okay, cool. It's a slight either change of mind here, or a slight, like, I actually believe this even more this year because I got more evidence around this. Right? It can look a number of different ways. It doesn't have to be anything miraculous, but you're not going to get it if you're just so dead set sure on every single thing and you get pissed at anybody who brings up a question in your mind. I spoke to I spoke to a group that was a Christian group, and just said, okay, well, let's talk about why here in this part of the book you guys are carrying around this particular Bible, and why right here it says anybody who knows who God is needs to celebrate this specific day for all of eternity. How many of you guys celebrate that? None of us. Cool. So what's the deal? That doesn't matter anymore. So God's a liar. No, God's not a liar. Well, but that got changed. If he got changed, then how can you trust anything else he said? If he changed his mind on something, he said forever at first, and then if I told my wife, yeah, I'm going to be with you forever, but later I'm like, nah, not really. Like, how is she going to trust me forever? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's so many different things that, again, logically, you can just go down certain paths, but if the emotional attachment is hard enough and strong enough and rooted in fear enough, then instead of being upset at the people who lied, people will get upset at the person who shows them they've been lied to.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so I wonder if it's not just the fear thing, but if it's also the pain thing, because whenever you question your foundational beliefs, like they're a foundation. And so then you have to reset the foundation.
That's right.
And that's difficult.
It's difficult because you're afraid of what that means, right? It's the same. So yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. Pain, fear, like, and you're afraid of fear a lot of times is the projection of the what ifs too, right? So if you're going to change the foundation, well, then what if I do that? Well, crap, my mom's going to be mad at me because she wants me to go to church and she wants me to go to her. My best friend probably won't talk to me, or these people won't. They'll think I'm crazy, and these people, right? So like, it's better to just retreat. I'm sure I'm close enough. It's, again, it's a fear.
When I mean, I guess it's possible that we could make the argument that it's like a evolutionary thing, but why do we care so much about appeasing the groups?
It is, yeah, and you're right. We can make it from an evolutionary, evolutionary argument where there's safety in numbers, and so you want to find that tribe. You can make it from a religious, you can, maybe it's from a religious thing, maybe it's from an evolutionary thing, maybe there's a number of different ways, but I mean, ultimately, that's what it is we're not the lone wolf animal. We're pack animals. I mean, that is down to our DNA. That's, again, part of it. Just like I believe that we can't pursue happiness in and of itself. We have to pursue a goal, and then happiness is a byproduct. I think it's the same sort of thing. We are just inherently, we pursue relationships, and we pursue wanting to be with others, and then that is what brings us peace and makes us feel whole. It makes us feel like we're on the right track. We have that woven into us to be these social creatures. So anything that is going to disrupt that social fabric, it makes you feel, it's almost never the case, but you almost extrapolate it in your mind into, I'm going to now unravel every relationship that I have, and I'm going to be alone. And that sounds terrifying and horrifying. And I just couldn't, because nobody wants that. I have found that not to be the case. I think if anything, it just tightens the tribe you're with. You find out who your tribe really is. You find out if, because at the end of the day, everybody on this planet disagrees with you about something. So do you unravel every friggin' relationship? No. You figure out who you can still come together with, because again, this division that's being perpetuated shouldn't be the case. We all actually agree on probably far more than we disagree on. And so we should come together on that rather than divide over other things. But we're just afraid of that division and afraid that it's going to unravel everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Were you always aware of your individuality, or did that become more a thing over time?
I was always relatively self-aware. I don't know that I would say I was aware of like individuality. I started to become aware over time that I thought differently than most, or that I don't even think I just think I tend to think more than most. And I don't mean that in a pat on the back kind of way. I just think I'm more contemplative, and I look at human behavior more than other people, including my own, and I analyze everything. How do I feel after this? How was my thinking after this? How clear was I able to think on this? How clearly was I able to articulate? How clearly what would I have done different there? And I remember doing that as a small kid, like, if I could go back and do that situation over and over again at recess, what would I have done? I remember doing that as early as probably 5 years old, right? Where I was just like, how would I change that? Okay, well, if it goes into next time, if this happens again, and I would practice and visualize and practice, okay, well, this will be how I'll handle it, and this is what I will do. I remember doing that at an early age. So I don't know that I had claimed that, my individuality in that regard, but I was very aware of my behaviors, my thoughts, how those impacted others, how others would perceive me. And then it was internal work on, do I care whether they perceive me that way or not? So, I think I'm in my head in a very, at this point, peaceful way, but it's a very consistent way, more so than other people.
And what kind of advice would you give to people that maybe need to take it slowly, but want to step out, like want to claim their individuality, but don't know where to begin?
I think you have to define what that means, claiming the individuality, because I think a lot of people I think each person's going to need to define what that means, because a lot of people will look at that and go, okay, well, the way I'm going to be an individual is, they'll take it from a stereotypical cultural standpoint of, I'm going to claim my individuality. So now I'm a Tyrannosaurus Rex that's pansexual with green hair, and that's how I show the world that I'm an individual. I think that's how you show you're confused and you're scared and you're lost. So I think that's a different conversation, right? So I think you have to define what that means. And I think it's more of a becoming more self-aware of your likes, dislikes, gifts, passions, emotions. What are the emotions that tend to come up? How do I control those versus being controlled by them? Because emotions are good things, but you have to learn how to control those. And I think it's more of that. It's a self-awareness kind of game. And I don't know that it can be, I think you're going to be forced to take it slowly, because that's just how human development works. But I don't think you should be intentional about making that a slow thing. I think you should be intentional about going as fast as possible, being as consistent as possible on figuring out who I am, putting yourself in more situations so that you have to learn from those situations who you are. I love the old Fight Club adage of how much do you ever know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? And I've never been more inside my head than when I was actually physically fighting another human being. And the majority of the time that was in sport. It wasn't like street confrontations. There was a couple of those, but the majority of the time was in sport. But I've never been more inside my head, and you can have thousands of people screaming around you and it's completely silent. Because you're learning so much about yourself at at that point. And you're learning it very, very rapidly. And I think so you have to have a rapid focus and simultaneously be super patient that you're not actually going to figure things out for a long time.
What do you mean, like you're learning so much about yourself whenever you're in a fight?
You learn so much about yourself in any kind of intense scenario.
Okay.
Right. So you are forced. And again, is this a spiritual thing? Is this an evolutionary thing? Is it, I think you can argue both sides probably, but you are in an intense situation. You'll hear people say, well, I had like this out of body experience and this was intense. And usually that means it's extreme. And a lot of times you'll hear about it in a not a good situation, and so there was an abuse happening or something, and I just kind of floated out of my body and kind of like disassociated, right? I think in an intense scenario, your mind is either going to completely need to disassociate or it's going to need to focus harder than it ever has. And so I can tell you, in those extreme situations, like it's just quiet. You're getting hit, you feel that, you're hitting somebody, you feel that, you're kind of relying back on what you're like, which is just, it's a quiet thing and you're inside your mind and you're like, can I handle that? Can I continue with that? How does that, like, it's an intensity that you just don't get too many other ways. So I'm big, especially for young men, on intense physical situations, because I think it's the mental gain from those intense physical situations. I can obviously speak from the perspective of a man. It's some of the most eye-opening things you can do.
Interesting. So whenever you were explaining the way that it felt and how you said that, like, yourself more in that moment, like it's just like this silence, but you're with yourself. Is it kind of like whenever, I don't know, like I know the idea behind meditation is just to silence so that you can just be. Is that kind of how it is?
It might be. I've never meditated. I've got friends who do so, and that is something that's similar. So yeah, I would imagine that is a weird way to say I like to meditate by getting punched in the face. Yeah, totally like that. I think that is probably a similar form. Yeah, it probably is. And I've had some similar experiences in other physical scenarios too, and tearing my, torn calf muscle and a sinus infection, but running a 13-mile race at 8,000 feet of altitude. Yuck. Like super gross, awful, hated it, didn't enjoy a single bit of it. But I learned a whole lot about what I'm capable of, and learned a whole lot about what the human body is capable of, and learned a whole lot about how much the mind controls the body versus body controlling the mind if you let it. And learned a lot. You just learn a lot about yourself there, and it makes everything else, just gives you perspective. So I imagine, yeah, meditation probably brings a lot of the similar benefits. I just can't personally speak to it.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounded similar. I was like, oh, this is actually such an interesting connection. Today I was looking up some quotes by Joseph Campbell, and one of them was about the fact that we externalize the search for truth. Like we look into other things to find truth. Maybe it's religion, maybe it's politics, maybe it's like even just like looking at nature. But he was like, all of the answers are within you. And I was thinking about this for a little bit, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting because of the fact that like if you believe in a creator and you believe in the fact that like creators can create what is in them, right? Like we can create things that are a reflection of us. And so then every single aspect of us is a reflection of something bigger, which is really, really interesting to think about. And the idea of just like really sitting with yourself. It's almost like it's not novel enough because you think you know yourself, but then you sit with yourself and you think about every single aspect of yourself.
Yeah, actually, you're right. We don't know ourselves as much as we think we do. We're too distracted. You think you know yourself because of who you follow on Instagram, or you think you know yourself because of what you listen to, or you think you know yourself because you like a certain football team, or all of those are outlets for you to pay attention to somebody else. All outlets for you to outsource your mind, to put your mind focused on something else outside of you versus that internal. You're not actually learning a ton about yourself with that. You're not actually sitting with yourself with that. If anything, we're taught to be more and more distracted with that. So yeah, it's an interesting concept, and it's interesting to start trying to dissect the concept of truth, and is there absolute truth? And as people say, well, my truth is, and it's like, well, okay, but is there still an absolute truth? Somebody's said to me, like, are you cold right now? And I said, no, I'm not cold. And they said, well, I am. So is the absolute truth that it's cold? And I went, well, the absolute truth is that it is whatever temperature it is. I'm not cold and you are, right? So it's almost like there's a false sense of my truth, your truth. I still think there's absolute truth, and so yeah, it becomes a really weird exercise to see where you tend to navigate towards, and what kind of where you're sitting on that. Very interesting.
Oh, yeah. And the concept of absolute truth is also really interesting because, especially in society today, it's really difficult to come to a similar conclusion whenever we can't come to a similar conclusion on anything, even externally.
Yeah, it is. Well, and then don't want to go any further because it's too painful, or because it's creating that divide. And so, like, you should be able to do that. You should be able to have these high level conversations and go, man, I completely disagree, and go, cool, interesting. Like, I would rather hear that. Cool. Tell me what you disagree with. Like, that's awesome. Let's do this. Because I'm super, not because I want to be combative. I'm just super interested in, I'm very, very, whether it's, again, biological or spiritual or whatever, I'm very, very interested in being correct. And I think a lot of people are. I'm very interested in it. But what I've come to understand is that if I'm truly interested in it, then what I have to be more interested in is being proven wrong. And I'm okay with that, because if I can get proven wrong, then it probably means somebody else had better evidence, in which case I'll change my mind. So hopefully then I'm more close to being correct. Right. And people don't want that. They want to just hear they want whatever that person, I don't remember who said that, but more people don't really want to hear your opinion. They want to hear their opinion coming out of your mouth, and I think that's the case for most people.
Yeah, and it's rough, and it makes everything a lot more difficult.
Definitely does.
Okay, so I have, oh yeah, I have an interesting question. The way that Acton works, it's very, would you call it democratic, or what would you call it?
Yeah, it can be. It can be democratic, and I don't always love that. But I also, excuse me, depending on the scenario, I also don't know a better alternative. Sometimes, it's like that whole. But it can be somewhat democratic. At the root of it, it's around liberty, really, and it's around liberty and freedom, but it's the correlating responsibility. I mean, that's really it. It's at the very heart of it. It's around individualism, almost like the rugged individualism, I guess.
How would you explain the governing structure of Acton, even if it doesn't have a name?
Yeah, learner led is the structure, or a flat self-management, I guess, sort of structure too, right? Where it's like we're just basically working on, it's almost a libertarian philosophy of, I'm going to do me, you do you, and if we decide to come together, we're going to do so on a handshake, and that's my word is my contract, and let's do this, and then I'll hold you accountable to what you promised me, you'll me accountable to what I promised you, and then we'll go forward. And if we don't want to interact, we won't interact. If we don't want to do business, we won't do business. The only thing we're all going to agree on is that each one of us should be partially looking out for ourselves and not mess with anybody else. So it's really kind of almost like the libertarian value system, so to speak. So, governance kind of comes out of that, where there's an agreed upon set of principles and rules, and they kind of every studio creates their governance rules so that they have something tangible to go back to. Now those can be shifted and changed and amended, but that's really it. It's a creation of the collective, and everybody signs on. And the reality is, at the end of the day, it comes back to the individualism, because even if you don't agree with one of the rules that your studio has created with you in it, then ultimately you can either fight to have that removed, fight to have it amended, or you just don't sign the contract. The only downside is you don't get to stay at the school.
Oh, interesting.
Everybody's signing on that they agree with this so that they have something tangible to work with the understanding they can amend going forward. So,
So does
things panacea, but
everybody have to agree on the rules for it to be like, okay, these are the rules? Is it majority? How does that work?
I mean, it's the majority that decides to put it on there, and you still may have a small majority, and so that's where the the results of a lot of the conflicts, especially as they get older, will maybe come up because I'm like, well, I didn't necessarily want to agree to that anyways, but usually it ends up being something that's very minor, and usually if you have somebody that's agreeing, disagreeing with certain things, and if they're really going to focus on it, well, it's a deeper rooted issue, right? Like I don't want to pay taxes, I really don't, but I don't spend my life bitching and moaning about taxes. I spend my life creating what I want to create and doing what I need to do and going, okay, I don't like that particular part of the system, but I also value the freedom that I have in this country to build things and create things and work hard to do something, and there's a correlating reward that comes from that, whatever that reward is, whether it's monetary, socially, whatever. I value that. I value that enough to deal with the things that I don't necessarily love, and I'm going to focus there. So, students that tend to focus on the one or two little things that they might not like, it's usually an indicator of a bigger issue, and they're trying to avoid, some of the other stuff, so they don't tend to last long.
How do you do conflict resolution?
Depends on the age, but that contract is a big part of it, right? Is so them having something tangible to go to is a part of it. We also have other external systems that we use. There's an internal monetary system that we have that is more for the younger heroes than it is the older. But part of it is do the work, get paid for the work, and that directly translates into society. And then part of it is a character maintenance as well, right? Where they have the ability to, hey, if you're doing something that I think is in violation of that contract, I'm going to ask you to pull one of your lion bucks, is what we call them on this campus, wolf bucks on some of my other campuses, timber wolf bucks or whatever. They're gonna you have to pull that. You got to go put it in an envelope, and then if I decide, no, that was pulled unjustly, I can appeal it, and it goes to a jury of my peers who can kind of hear out both sides of the case and make the ultimate decision. And if I continuously, habitually am messing with other people and they're continuously asking me to pull my stuff, well, there's a pattern of behavior there that can go towards, now I lose all my money, which means I may have to contact my parents and let them know the situation and what I've been choosing to do. And so ultimately it gives you the opportunity to either self-select to stay in the community and be a valuable part, or self-select out. Really it always comes down to that choice of the individual.
Interesting. So Acton is founded upon the fact that you have to have these free thinking individuals that are critically thinking, that are kind of knowledgeable, that are fair.
Yep. And you always have a choice, and we will honor your choice. Whether that
Interesting.
choice is to stay here or to go, we will honor your choice. Whether that choice is to do something that earns you something, or earns you something positive, or that choice to earn something negative, we will honor that choice. But if there's too many of the negatives, it starts bringing down the tribe as a whole. Well, you are choosing to leave, and we'll honor that choice too.
So I imagine that you've thought about Acton as like present in a bigger role, like as an actually society kind of format.
Yeah.
How do you think that would play out?
Oh, it'd be great. I don't go down that rabbit hole too much because I know how much of a mountain that is, and how honestly unrealistic that is, but not in like a pessimistic, super sad way. Just that I understand the other side of the game so much, and I understand what they're willing to do, and I understand the agenda, and I understand that 90+% of people go through that other system. So I'm not naive enough to believe that we're going to just overtake that and everybody's going to go, oh my gosh, and they're going to convert over. It would be amazing. It would be a whole different kind of individual society, which, going back to what I said earlier, if you got a bunch of strong individuals, that collective is amazing. There's just too much fear that just won't, it won't take place. I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure there is as many as humanly possible, or even similar kind of alternatives. I'll do whatever I can while I can to get as much as possible to build that better alternative. But yeah, it'd be awesome. Won't happen.
Interesting. So I have one more question, and then I want to hop into one more topic before I go ahead and let you go.
Okay.
Okay, so is there another side? Like, I know that everybody's always like, oh, this side and that side and whatever, but the way that you make it seem, it's like there are certain people with, and I know that um, politics is pretty much just competing agendas,
Mhm.
but like, is there actually another side, anybody that doesn't want people to succeed? And if so, why?
You mean from like a just like a global standpoint, and like what do you like other side? Global standpoint, governmental standpoint, political standpoint, like what?
Well, depending on what you know, because like, so you've had experience in a couple of different industries.
Sure,
You've seen the government, you've seen
sure,
all of this
yeah,
education,
yeah,
but from your personal experience.
sure. So let me, I'll answer this by asking a question, and this is a question that I asked somebody, and you may know the answer to this. Surprisingly, to me, I guess not many people do know, but like, who owns the Federal Reserve?
I believe the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank.
Okay, okay, okay.
So a lot of people would be like, oh, it's part of the U.S. government, right? But it's not. It's a privately owned bank. Just like I own schools, there are families that own the Federal Reserve that
Mm-hmm.
creates all of the monetary rules for our system. Anybody can look that up, right? Anybody can look that up. So when you start to just go from there and go, wait a second, all right? So there's families that privately own a system that controls how we operate everything. And they've decided, let's see, in the last 22 months to print 80% of the money we've ever had. And you've got, so when you start going down things like that, I definitely don't know who every person is. I can't name you the specific. I can give you a couple of the families that own that, but when you start peeling back the onion from that, and again, I didn't start doing that, questioning any of that until I was told what I was told by the Secret Service agent, which was enough there to know that there was a lot of things being perpetuated to the public that were not true. Friends in CIA who have said some of the most common stories around certain things that are not true. Yeah, I do believe there is another side who has a kind of a global agenda, World Economic Forum being part of that issue. And, you got Klaus, what's his name, talking about the great
Schwab.
Yeah, Klaus Schwab talking about the great reset for 2030. And I very much believe there is a group pushing towards trying to make that happen. Yeah, I mean, I really do. And it also happens to coincide from a spiritual standpoint with a time, the timeline that's kind of laid out there. So I don't think that's necessarily coincidental, right? So yeah, I do think there is a bigger agenda, a little bit of a bigger enemy that's not necessarily as in your face. I think we see some of the players, from a political standpoint or from, a corporate standpoint. And I think there's some people we see as the players, but I don't think we see publicly the people that are really kind of pulling the strings and the organizations that are really kind of pulling the strings.
I wouldn't disagree. I think that point is very, very true.
And I would be glad to be wrong, by the way.
Yeah.
Again, going with the best evidence that I got.
It will, and whenever you zoom out and you think about it from the point of most people are self-interested, and if this is privately owned, and if people's livelihood is wrapped up in certain things, for example, politics, like politics was not supposed to be a forever job. It was supposed to be a public service. So then it's just like, of course, if it's somebody's livelihood, they're going to do what it takes.
For sure.
It's definitely interesting. Okay. And I think this is a great segue into the very last topic. I love the idea of, instead of fighting people, you just step out and build things. I think that's the best thing. What kind of advice would you give to people that want to build things? Because you've done it. What does it take? How you said it's difficult.
It is difficult, but it's usually simple. And people mistake those things, right? It's like it is not easy, but it is simple. Almost everything is really actually simple, but almost nothing worthwhile is easy, right? Marriage is simple. It's not easy. You're going to disagree. You're going to go through some hard things. You're going to go through some ups and downs, but it's simple in terms of like, okay, as you go through this, support one another, be nice to each other. Like, stay with your commitment to one another. You know, don't break that. Stay true to your word. Like, all those things are actually very, very simple. The hard part is doing all of those every day for a long period of time. You go to build anything, whether that's a relationship, like I said, with marriage, whether that's your fitness and your health, whether that is a business and an answer to something that you think is a problem. It's almost always very, very simple. There are certain things you know you need to do, and you need to do them to the best of your ability every day, forever. You're going to mess some of it up. Be okay with that. Be okay with the fact that you're going to mess it up. Don't overthink it. Do it first. Then let your mistakes and your successes dictate what the next step is. Don't sit and analyze it first, right? So it's a very simple step forward one day, step forward day 2, step forward day 3, step forward day 500, step forward day 1,000, step forward day 10,000. That's where most people fail, is because they wear themselves out. And they just decide to quit, and they don't stay committed to whatever that vision is that they want to create. Commitment and consistency are the keys. I mean, it really, really is.
No, I love that. And I think back to the point that we were talking about before, sometimes you have to step out of the rules and the society and just the ideas that you have been taught are true, and stop fearing failure and just keep on going, commit to yourself.
Just keep going. And like you and I were talking about the podcast, I'm like, you know, you said you want to get your first 10 and get them going. And most people, you know, stop before 10. Yeah, you're right. Most people do. Most people stop quickly. Most people don't actually want to do a podcast. They have something they think they want to say once. And if they said it on a microphone, they really would do a better job being one person's guest one time. And it's like, I just wanted to say that publicly, and now I'm done. Like, that's what most people actually want to do. Get something off their chest. It's harder to actually go long tail and build something. And that's why, you know, I was telling you, Seth Godin told me, you know, let me know at episode 50, because he wanted to make sure I was actually going to commit and do something first, because most people don't.
Makes sense. Okay, I'm about to hit you with some rapid fire questions. You ready for this?
Let's see what happens.
They're slightly deep, so just answer your first instinct. Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. What do you value in life?
What do I value in life? I'm going to go integrity.
I love that.
Yeah.
What is a good life?
A good life is a free life. It's one that you design freely, and you have peace of mind throughout that, because you're operating based on your values, your integrity, right? You maintain that. That's good life.
I love that as well. Okay. What lights your spirit up?
My kids.
That's so cute. Okay. And last, if you could only leave one piece of advice for the world and the generations below you, what would you say?
Quit being afraid. Fear is, you know, for me, is what plagues humanity. It's been the root of all of our biggest issues, is we've been afraid and let go of that fear.
And how do you combat it? Love?
You combat it with fighting. Love is a bonus, but you fight consistently and with commitment. You know, it's that consistency and integrity, right? You have those kind of things. Love is a byproduct. It's a side part. It's a huge part. It's a fantastic part. But you got to stay committed and character driven and integrity driven, and you do it every single freaking day.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation, and I really love every single thing that you're doing.
I appreciate that.
I hope that you found this episode enriching. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you would like to write a rating or a review, that would be fantastic. You can also follow me at Educator Podcast. I'm looking forward to our next episode. Cheers.